This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello. This is your host, Mr. Harry Wilkinson. Sorry, let me get my mic up here. Hi, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we talk about the days and weeks events, happenings in the world of entertainment, politics, science, religion, and anything else that affects us that we interact with during the course of our week. And we take a look at these stories, this information, all of these things that appear to be so onerously real in our world. And we take a look at it from a higher perspective. That higher perspective, believing that as real as these things may seem to be on a certain level, they really are not. They are creations of our own. And this is where the metaphysical part of this comes in, where we come from the perspective, or I come from the perspective of the fact that we are creators. At the highest level, we are a divine mind, for lack of a better term. And we create these sort of scenarios to play in, to experience certain things, to experience certain feelings, to experience that which we, at our ultimate truth, are not. And we do it for those experiences. We do it in a way that kind of makes us forget the truth of who we are for a while. In the same way that you might walk into a movie theater and watch a really good movie and get so lost in it that you don't even remember, anything about who you were when you walked in that theater until till the movie's over, and then you walk out of the theater again. But that's maybe not so great an analogy, but it's close. Another analogy I frequently use is one of about a hologram or a virtual reality experience. And as our technology catches up with this idea, and we create more and more very, very convincing virtual reality worlds, and believe me, they are on their way, and many are here already. They will most certainly become. I would go out on a limb and say that they will probably become the primary source of entertainment in years to come. I'd say maybe even 10 years from now. Maybe even, that close. And it will far outstrip movies, although they may interact with movies, and they may sort of have, maybe a connection to them, or some sort of, some sort of deal where the movie is released and you can experience a virtual reality version of it. Yeah, but in any case, I think it will far outstrip television and film as our primary source of entertainment in a way. And I think it'll be interesting. I don't know why I chose to go off on this little tangent, but bear with me, because when these things come, they usually just are intuitions on my part, so I share them. I think what will happen is that you will see film as we know it today, and even television series and programming as we know it today, become much more complex works of art and less visceral, because the virtual reality experience will take up that space. Virtual reality will give you the visceral, and that's what those, at least I think, for at least the beginning part of its emergence, it will be, these visceral experiences. So action films and action kinds of things will probably play somewhat lesser of a role right now, When you do a movie, it's got to be high octane, high energy if it wants to get major release and all of that kind of thing. Well, I think we'll see that start to change because people will be getting that energy out of some of the virtual reality experiences. But anyway, that's as far as I'll go on this tangent because there's a lot to talk about today. On our last show, I talked about the connection between anger and change. And that anger is an energy that needs to be used. And that it can be used in a very positive way to create positive change. Or it can be stuffed down and morphed into hate. But anger and hate are not the same things. They are not the same things. And you know this. I mean, you can be angry at a situation. You can be angry at someone. You can be angry at behavior. And not be hateful about it. Hate is something else. Hate is a fear response. Hate is hate is a kind of belief system in a way. To hate someone or to hate a group of someone's, you really have to have a belief system that supports that. You have to believe that those people or that person that you hate is trying to do something terrible to you. Okay, nobody hates just for the sake of hating. Now, in the case of some of these hate groups, sometimes it's a bonding kind of thing where people will come together over this kind of thing. But it's, as I say, a belief system. The belief that someone means you serious harm and will stop at nothing to, destroy you and everything that you care about. It's a belief system that that comes out of that. Nobody hates, as I say, because they just want to hate. They believe they're righteous in their hatred. They believe, and if you talk to any white supremacist or black separatist, they'll tell you, that they are absolutely justified in their beliefs because they know from experience, they've seen in the past, and they just know that they are going to fight the good fight. It's the same thing that drives groups like ISIS. Those are hate groups on a massive scale. So, but hate and anger aren't the same thing. But unfortunately, they get twisted up. And I think the unfortunate thing is that anger, as it's presented in our culture, it's presented as something to be feared and controlled. And it's understandable, people can feel angry and then take actions that are destructive. But again, those are two entirely different things. Anger does have a place. But what we're taught, and if you go and do a Google search right now about anger, what you will get are numerous articles, anger management tips, telling you how you should control your anger. And that's how we think of anger. Anger is something to be tamped down, stuffed away. And I'll tell you what, the more you do that, the worse it's going to be. Tamped down anger, repressed anger, can be very unhealthy for you. It can turn into depression. It can turn into all kinds of health problems. I believe that's just as dangerous as, people who strike out at others in anger. In fact, the likelihood of someone ultimately striking out in anger increases, I believe, when they're encouraged not to, accept their anger or to push their anger down or, repress it or control it. So there's two things to think about when you're thinking about anger. Uncontrollable anger, and anger doesn't have to be uncontrollable. In fact, it rarely is. As I say, it becomes uncontrollable when it's not expressed and used in a way that it needs to be used. Now, expressing that anger doesn't mean burning down things, hurting or killing people. That's something else again. Anger is that passion. As I said in the last show, anger is that thing that tells you something's wrong here. Something needs to change. Something is violating my boundaries. Something is unjust. We'll put it that way. And so there's many, many positive ways to use your anger. People do it every day. You might write an angry email. Now, the process of writing itself allows you to take a step back in that and focus your anger in a different way. But the fact of the matter is that we're never taught that anger is a good thing, or that anger has a positive thing, or has a positive face to it. The focus is always on it getting out of control and just being destructive. And that's not to say that it can't. But the idea is not to keep your anger at bay. It's to embrace your anger and go into it. That's not to take action yet. When you feel it, and here's what I'll say, when you feel that anger, feel it. Feel it all the way. Go into it. See what it has to say to you. Then take that anger energy and bring it out of that situation and into your space and use it. Find out which way it points you. And use that energy to create something, to counterbalance whatever it is that's making you angry. We had the Republican convention this past week, and there you could see a large number of major examples of anger. These are some angry folks. What particularly comes to mind is Rudy Giuliani's speech, which I did not watch all the way through, but saw clips of, and he was almost literally foaming at the mouth. And what was he angry about? Angry about terrorists coming to hurt us. Angry about immigrants coming to hurt us. This man who comes from an immigrant family. There was an awful lot of anger. But as many have pointed out, a lot of that anger comes from a sense among a certain group of people in this country who are quite legitimately suffering. Working class people. And these tend to be white working class people who feel like the shift, the change that's happening in the country where there's greater ethnic diversity becomes threatening to them because they feel that whatever advantages they might have had are slipping away. That's one part of it. Another part of it is a blame game. As I said, in the middle of the country, and this is something I think Michael Moore pointed out, in the middle of this country we have a huge number of middle-class people, and a lot of them middle-class white people, whose jobs have disappeared, whose jobs have gone. These are people who in days past would have made quite a good living, working at the local factory or what have you. And those jobs are gone. And they're upset about that. And they feel like they're not being heard. Nothing is being done to address those problems. And those are very real issues that should make you angry. Now, how you use that anger, that's where the issue comes in. Even if, and I'll say this, even if you don't agree with what they believe in, using that anger in a positive way means, you create a group, or you create a website, or you create, even the Tea Partiers, And again, I don't agree with their agenda, but they gathered together and they used the energy that they had over the things that were making them angry and began to, use that anger to direct them in the things that they wanted to do, the things that they wanted to change. And quite frankly, if you want to talk about the Tea Party, they have created quite a bit of change. Is it good change? I'm not sure. But they certainly have changed politics for the Republicans. And as Donald Trump has, he comes from the same kind of, grassroots kind of take back the country. I believe that he's probably less inflexible than these Tea Partiers are, who, are very conservative and feel that they're tired of having their conservative values undermined. And there's the same kind of thing at play on the progressive side. This is what the Bernie Sanders campaign is all about, and many progressives feeling that the real change that they believe needs to happen in this country isn't happening, and the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party leaders are not hearing them. And so you have this level of frustration and anger building, and right now that's what's fueling a lot of politics, is a passionate anger about things that they are experiencing in their lives. And we have a system in place that is really run to the large degree by major corporate interests, which involve money and people who believe that, radical change will take away everything that they've invested so much of their lives in. and they're not allowed. They're not about to let that happen. Powerful people who may or may not, be conspiring to do these things, but will just take actions based on their own best interests. There's many examples of that. The reason why we don't have a healthcare system in which anybody can get healthcare who needs it without having to worry about money and without having to make a private insurance company rich on top of it. So many other countries have shown us how to do this, and we don't want to do that. And the reason is you have people invested in the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry, and they make profits that they're not particularly ready to let go of. So this is why this anger comes about. This anger comes about because people's needs, in many cases, aren't being addressed, and in many cases are being overshadowed by other interests that may take care of certain things, but don't actually reach down to the basic needs that people have. So how does this change in the transition era? This transition era that I talk about, that we're in right now, in the middle of it. How does politics change? And I think you'll see a lot of this, particularly in the millennials' approach to politics. This millennial generation is a lot more politically aware, and I talked about that in our last program, about why that is. Because they have more access to it via the internet and more people talking to them on their level and on their interest level. So that politics doesn't become this, onerous thing that's boring and, inaccessible, but it becomes something that they see affects their lives and the lives of the people that they care about. So in this transition era, and for those of you who've listened to the show before, you know that what I mean by that. The transition era that we are in now is this era where we are experiencing radical and deep change at all levels of our society. Social change for sure. So you're seeing and will continue to see things like the Black Lives Matter movement play out, and the Occupy movement, which even though there's not a lot of coverage on it right now, it's still happening. And the income inequality movement, you'll continue to see, Arab Spring-like ideas struggle against, the repression and backlash of, things like ISIS. So this era of transition, where all of these deep changes are happening because of a confluence of events. A lot of it has to do with technology, but most of all, and I think probably the greatest understanding that we are dawning upon in this transition era is that politics doesn't matter. Politics doesn't change things, although it can. But what really happens is it has to come from within. Ideas have to come from the divine mind, I guess, or just from the spiritual aspect of it, from the energy that you want to put out there. When we choose to not be afraid of, for instance, providing healthcare for everybody, regardless of income, when we choose to not be afraid of those things, when we choose to just say we're going to do this, and when we're ready to do that, those things happen. And there are many tools at our disposal. Politics is one of them. But trying to use a tool and making that the basis of how you're going to change things doesn't work. It has to be used with a guiding spirit, with a guiding energy. And the example I give of this is the resistance to, for instance, gay marriage, which for decades was something that wouldn't go anywhere. But because of, we have, our consciousness has evolved about it, or the consciousness of many people has evolved about it. We reached a tipping point, and now there's no problem. It's very easily being done. There's not that there isn't some resistance to it, but overall, it's happening on a massive scale in a way that would never have been done even 10 years ago. It has to do with consciousness. And that's what the transition era is all about. It's about consciousness. And political consciousness has to do with becoming aware of situations that might be harmful or unfair, and how to go about changing those. That's political consciousness. It has to do with the well-being of people. And as our consciousness rises and we begin to understand our connectedness to one another, and how what we do and think greatly affects our world and the people around us. And when we start to really understand that we are creating it all, and we can create things differently anytime we choose, and specifically when we choose our oneness, when we choose, for, standard term, love, but that doesn't really, somehow it doesn't really explain or go far enough, because the word love has a lot of different connotations. But we'll go with love because it's the closest we can get. Love is this energy of acceptance and of healing and hope, and understanding and connectedness. Whereas fear is that energy of separation and pushing away and living in illusion. So I'm going to leave you now, and I mentioned that I wanted to talk about millennials' influence on this, because they are the ones who are, most adaptable to change, and whose consciousness, all of our consciousnesses are changing, but they are particularly at the forefront. And so there's some studies that are showing, as millennials grow older, and millennials, by the way, the earliest millennials, they say, are born around 1980. So that's, if you were born in 1980, and you're in your mid-30s now, which means that you are probably, if you're in a career, you're probably getting yourself established in it. You may have family, you may have children. And their belief system is what is going to change the world. And their belief system is what is, I think, behind a lot of the, rapid changes. Certainly, I think, behind the rapid acceptance of things like gay marriage. And we're going to look at this study. I guess we'll talk more about millennials next week as we're running out of time here. But if you are a millennial, in that generation that was born between 1980 and 1995, those are the markers. And of course, those are just markers, by the way. It's always very interesting. People come up with these labels. Oh, well, you're Gen X, or you're a millennial, or you're, a baby boomer. Those, designations are just that. If you were born in November of 1979, you don't, suddenly not belong to the millennial generation. It's those are markers, just to make that clear. Anyway, but if you are one of those people, I would love to hear from you and what your thoughts are about the millennial generation. Do you think there's any credence in actually calling them by a label, giving them a label of a generation? Is there enough commonality in people in that age group where they are showing the same kinds of trends? I'd love to hear from you. So you can contact the show, right here. You can contact me also on Facebook. It is the Metaphysical Media page. And, I always post these shows and some articles of interest. So you can contact me via that page as well. Love to hear from you. But until then, it's time to wrap our show. So there's a lot of fear energy out there. There's a lot of fearful thoughts about the future. But try to keep that light. Stay positive.